Welcome everybody. My name's Stephen Morales. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of School Business Leadership. And welcome again to all of you for what promises to be a stimulating discussion, and more importantly, one that we hope leads to actions that can have real impact. Let's not forget that today marks the first anniversary of the tragic death of George Floyd. In terms of the background to the event, in 2019, the Institute for School Business Leadership commissioned a workforce survey, and the findings were really quite sobering. Only 3% of the school business leadership workforce come from a Black and ethnic minority background, and we found that quite concerning, quite upsetting, and we made a commitment as an institute to try and address the issue. We followed up the survey with a respected academic, Dr. Fiona Creeby, who conducted some deeper research into the findings and conducted a series of qualitative interviews with those that had experienced discrimination or racism in the workplace. And we felt it was important to follow that research up with a roundtable discussion with sector leaders. I should say that I am very grateful for the support that colleagues in the room today from NHT, ASCL, the Chartered College of Teachers, the Independent Schools Council, the National Governance Association and CST have provided me in pulling this event together, and I'm very keen to hear their contributions. For the sake of clarity, this event is not in response to the Sewell report, whatever reservations we may or may not have about its content. We're privileged to be joined by Professor Paul Miller today, who will address us all in a moment, along with colleagues from national education associations, school trusts and frontline practitioners who have been courageous enough to share their experiences with us. When we broadcast the roundtable discussion, we will simultaneously issue an EDI statement of intent, and that statement of intent is going to be signed, or has been signed actually, by all of the sector bodies in the room with us today. Because this is a discussion that we want the discussion to be as open as frank as possible, and when we broadcast it, we want to broadcast the entire conversation, and for those reasons we can't apply Chatham House rules. So it's important to say that what you say today will be in the public domain. In terms of just a very short bit of housekeeping, the running order will include a short break for questions after each segment and a short comfort break at 12 noon. When you leave the meeting, don't turn off don't turn off Zoom. Just mute your microphone and turn your camera off. And finally, before I pass over to Paul, I just want to raise the concept of unconscious bias and how unconscious it really is. Is it just a convenient excuse for not meaningfully engaging in the agenda? I think that's important to just park for one moment and maybe reflect on. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Professor Paul Miller. Welcome, Paul, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephen, and congratulations on organizing this event. It's good to see you all, colleagues, and great to be working with you through this roundtable today. It's really good to see that the enthusiasm, despite COVID, has not waned for greater equality and social justice. In particular, racial justice in our institutions. So it's really, really important, and I'm consoled. No doubt you all are as well. When I looked at the report from the Institute for School Business Leadership that Steve mentioned earlier, one of the recommendations that was put forward was to engage in some sector-wide engagement around the findings. And I think this is a good example of this, you know, that we're dealing with sector leaders in this meeting, but also the recommendation itself talks about collaborate with people from the DFE and other professional bodies. And that is also set out in one of the recommendations. So I'm glad that somebody's here from the DFE. It talks about continue to explore the lived experiences and realities of school business professionals. And so I'm pleased that that's where we're starting this morning. And also it talks about collaborating with sector experts and diversity scholars and researchers, and perhaps that's where I come in as an academic to explore some of these issues. So I'm really pleased to have looked into the recommendations set out and to be able to say that this roundtable seemed to suggest that indeed the Institute for School Business Leadership does take the recommendation seriously by implementing this one. So that's a real commendation to Steve. Colleagues, I don't want to speak too long because I know this is not my moment to speak, but a moment for my colleagues to speak. But I want to help us in a moment of provocation. In one paper that I wrote recently, which came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I argue that there are some system conditions that have the potential to sediment racial injustice and racism in our society. But the same system conditions, when they are in place and when they are in sync, have the potential to curtail racism and race inequality in our society. So it's an interesting paradox that the presence of these system conditions, when they are present and in sync, could really have an impact, a positive impact on racism. But when those conditions are not in place, so these 4 system conditions that I identify, I think, are really important. And the first one of them is the law. The law is the most potent shaper of values in any society. And therefore, if the law says X should happen, then the law usually will create the kinds of penalties if X does not happen. But we also see that, for example, the Equality Act, which I have described as a lock and a key, the Equality Act produces a zero-sum game. For example, it says it is illegal to take into account, to discriminate against people with particular EDI characteristics in any recruitment and employment round. But then the Equality Act goes on to say in the very next paragraph, but it is also illegal to take any of these protected characteristics into account when making employment decision. So I argue the Equality Act produces a zero-sum game where it promises equal opportunities of access, but it does not guarantee equal opportunities of outcome. Similarly, we know that under the previous versions of the Race Relations Amendment Act in 1978 and 2000, for example, there was a requirement on organizations to collect data on race reporting and so on. But that duty was removed under the Equality Act of 2000. So this is a good example of how the law, which is intended to solve this thorny issue, or at least to help with the solution, becomes complicit in the problem. The second condition, colleagues, is the issue of funding. Anti-racism work requires lots and lots of funding. And I was pleased back in 2014, when the government announced the LEDF, the Leadership for Equality and Diversity Fund, in recognition of the problem of access to leadership for a range of people with protected characteristics. Many schools proposed bids to the DFE and got money to look at stuff around gender, LGBTQ+, race, and so on. But last year, December, the government curtailed the funding under the LEDF and did not replace it with anything. So we see again that another system condition which is so much needed is not in place. And there are two other conditions which I will mention but not go through them in the interest of time. The other one is about the national public psyche. Society sets the standards for itself, and therefore what society views as acceptable, society will view as acceptable. What is clear is that in this country, for every one person who engages in anti-racism work, it appears that there are so many more persons who are involved in the opposite, at the opposite end of the spectrum. And the other thing is the public utterances of public figures, whether they are politicians or they are media personalities. And we have seen a lot of these things, but these people have the power to influence so many discourses in living rooms, on Twitter, on Instagram, you name it. And therefore, if their attitudes and values are shaped around anti-racism work, then it is much easier for our work to be successful. So those four system conditions, I think, are important for us to think about as we continue to do this important work. Colleagues, I am going to give way to our first contributors for the day, Sheryl, Sandy, Abby, and Lorna, who will speak in that order about their lived experiences, after which we'll have an opportunity to ask them one or two questions before we move into the next session. So I'm going to pass on to Sheryl.
Good morning. Thank you, Paul. So in preparation for today, I've done a lot of reflecting because I thought it was very important to put my experience into context. So I'm Sheryl Campbell. I'm a school business director at a very large secondary school in Southeast London, very diverse, comprehensive school. And I've been a school business leader for the last 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in local government. And so just to put myself into context, I was born of Jamaican parents who came to the UK in the 60s. So although I was born and bred in London, my cultural upbringing was a Jamaican household. That's very much who I am. That's what shaped me. I grew up in a Jamaican household. And if we fast forward to entering secondary school, I went to a private, very small secondary school in Dulwich. And my experience of that is that I was the only one Black person in my class of 30. And so in reflecting on that, I thought about, wow, these percentages are still the same. That works out to 3%. So I'm experiencing the same percentage I experienced way back in the 90s, going through secondary school. And my experience there was that I very much had to learn to live in two different worlds, learn to suppress my culture almost in trying to fit in that environment. And one thing I remembered back in 1991, I experienced an overt racist incident with one of who I thought was my school friends. And in thinking about that, I actually realized I didn't tell my teachers, I didn't tell my parents. I'd already learned at that age, and I was maybe about 13, I'd already learned not to rock the boat. So it's something I never reported. And it's something that I've thought about, just reflecting now, thinking about that. And so that's part of the experience I've had in this environment. And on leaving the school, I stayed till the end of the 5th year. And so leaving at the age of 16, there were 6 Black girls altogether in the whole year group. And we were taken into the head teacher's office, the ones who were leaving and not staying on for 6th form. We were taken into the head teacher's office, and the advice we were given is, You've had a wonderful time in our school. What you really need to learn now is how to survive in a white world. And that was our leaving advice. And I think now at the age of 16, I'm not sure I really understood what she was trying to say to me. I don't think I took that on board and processed it fully, but I remember that being my key piece of leaving advice. You need to learn to survive in a white world. And I think I took that away with me, but I'm not sure I ever did anything with that advice. So now in my working life, which, you know, I left uni 20 years ago, in my working life, it's still the same percentages. I'm still experiencing the same thing. So I'm nearly always the only Black face in the office, at meetings, at conferences, at networking events. And I mean, to put that into context, I think I've always lived in London, and London is very much diverse. So I do wonder how that translates to people outside of London, but that is still my experience, even with being in a very diverse part of the country. And so when we think about the ISBL workforce survey that Stephen mentioned earlier, it was that 3% that jumped out at me, you know, and really spurred me on. You know, I thought 3% of school business leaders are from a Black or Asian background. How is that right? How is that possible? And so that really spurred me on to start up an association. So I started then the Association of BAME Business Leaders in Education. And really the goal of that was to try and raise the profile of school business leaders who are from an ethnic minority and encourage more into the profession as well. But the thing that stuck with me is that 3% really a true reflection? It's 3% of the respondents, but what I was hoping is that there were more out there who hadn't engaged with the survey for one reason or another, and that we could encourage them to really come into the forefront and say, actually, there are a few more of us out there. The percentages are not as gloomy as we thought they might be. So that's really part of what I'm trying to do, is trying to, you know, draw people out into the spotlight and try and understand that there are a few more of us out there. So that's spurred me on to try and I'm trying to make a difference there. But I think it's really key that 32 years later, I'm still experiencing the same percentages, even with the London context that we put into account. And against my natural instincts, I'm naturally an introvert. Against my natural instincts, I've taken that decision to step forward and still keep trying to make a difference, you know. And so now I'm doing that on hopefully a national scale, but still as a school business leader, I'm having to step forward and say, right, what can I do in my own school? And I don't think it's because necessarily that I'm a Black school business leader, but I think naturally this type of work falls to school business leaders to take up the mantle. There is a very clearly defined part of decolonizing the curriculum, but there's so much more to it than just the curriculum. And I think everything else naturally falls to school business leaders. So where you're looking at your recruitment processes, that comes within a school business leader's remit. So, and it's just a double whammy that I happen to be a Black school business leader, but I'm trying to get that message out there that school business leaders in general, we all need to be making these changes within our organizations. So I've had a few of these discussions and we've talked about things that people have done within their own schools, and people are making small changes. So for example, lots of people have already for a long time been taking out the names on application forms so that you have the blind recruitment. And lots of people have been doing that for a long time and trying to look at the difference that makes. But in some of the conversations I've had recently, I've talked about whether it could go a bit further. So should we be taking out the names of the universities? So I know some head teachers who actually say, well, if they've gone to a Russell Group university, that puts them straight in the pile. If they haven't, we'll put them to the other side. Now, what we need to look at is, are you automatically disadvantaging people because they haven't had access to that Russell Group university? Russell Group, I think, have published some stats themselves about their having a fewer number of BAME people who go to their university. So why you automatically disadvantage them by saying this is a good degree rather than the first is a good degree? You know, so those sorts of things are the conversations that I've been having recently, and how not to disadvantage people indirectly by an action that you really may not have thought of beforehand. And as part of AbleEd, so what we've been looking at is, what are the barriers? How can we help to, you know, increase that barrier? For myself, I would say that I've had many more experience of microaggressions as opposed to overt racism. So I've always been on the leadership team. When I've been in 3 schools now, I've always been on the leadership teams. But the microaggressions that you notice are not usually being asked about anything to do with behavior. But when it comes to an issue about hairstyles, suddenly you're the expert. I don't get involved in behavior decisions, but now I'm the expert because it's about whether or not we should have dreadlocks. And these are small things that I think colleagues could think about these questions a bit more and say, well, why am I involving this person now? Is it about their race, or is it because they are the expert on it? And I'm not an expert on behavior policies or how we sanction pupils in schools. It's not my area at all. So I think, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily, and this may be because of the London context, I wouldn't say necessarily I've experienced lots of overt racism, but the microaggressions themselves are most definitely there. You know, in a previous school where the parents were difficult and they would normally meet with members of the leadership team, I suddenly realized that I was being asked to meet with the Black parents. So, and it was sort of a thing, well, you will understand where they're coming from. You will understand. Rather than trying to meet with them themselves, it was, you will understand where they're coming from. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant because I don't understand the Somali culture. And I don't see why I would understand that any more than someone from an English culture. So it's the microaggressions that are there, which may or may not, as Stephen was saying, they may or may not be unconscious. We don't know. And is that an excuse to say, you know, I can do this and get away with it because I will just say it's an unconscious bias. I didn't realize it was offensive. I didn't realize the things I was doing would cause offense. And I think that's a really important thing to examine. You know, how that can affect people on your leadership team, how that can affect people who you're working with. You know, we're not going to change this overnight. I think it's important for everybody to have a greater understanding. And, you know, personally, I feel that we've had a change. You know, in the last year or so, there's been a real sea change and people have become empowered to speak up, to be allies. So whereas previously, I haven't dealt with a lot of racist incidents. And now I feel like I'm dealing with more, not because the people around me have suddenly become more racist, but we've created a culture where it's safe to speak up. You know, and people understand that they will be taken seriously and it won't be just brushed to one side. So I think that's the important thing, that going forward, it cannot be just one moment in time, but it has to be a change, sea change going forward, where we're changing cultures and we're making it a comfortable place for everyone. I think that for me is the key thing for me to take away from this today. And so I can now pass you on to Sandy, who will give you some of her lived experience.
Thank you, Sheryl. Like Sheryl, I did a lot of reflection when I was asked to do this. And I came to the conclusion that my experiences are not really as bad as a lot of other people. And so I did think of sort of pulling out of this today because I'm thinking, you know, what do I have to share? However, that reflection sort of took me, it sort of looked more on the fact that most of the incidents with discrimination for me were very subtle. They weren't as overt as you know, a lot of people are experiencing today, but I did have a couple. Like Sheryl, my background is Jamaican. I was born and raised in Jamaica. I came into this country in 2001. And that was my first experience with anything racial, any racial discrimination, you know, at the very airport where, you know, my family and I were stuck in the airport. We came off the plane. I think we landed about a little after 7 in the morning, and we left the airport at 3 in the afternoon because we were told to just sit there and wait. And the person that was dealing with us just left his shift, left our passports sitting on the table, no handover. I was with a young child that was 10 months old, and we sat there. And it wasn't until I had to get up and started, you know, asking questions that somebody just picked up our passport and said, "Oh, we don't know why you're here." You know, and, you know, to me, and at the time it didn't, you know, shout racism, but looking back on all of those things, I came into this country with 10 years experience in banking. I was an assistant manager of one of the largest banks in Jamaica when I came here with a degree in banking. And I applied for some jobs in the bank over here. And I actually got 3 interviews. 2 of the banks requested as a part of the interview process that I was to complete a sort of what we call an equalities form and to put a photograph, attach a photograph and return it. At the time, I didn't realize I didn't have to put a photograph on there, but I did. I never heard anything back from them after that. I mean, I got a letter saying that, the interview details, these are the interview details, we'll let you know the time, closer to the time once you return this form, called, didn't get anything back, and still didn't get an interview, not even for a cashier's position after my years of experience. And then, started working in the hotel. I think the one incident that stood with me to this day is I was on night shift one night, and this gentleman walked in about 10 o'clock. And I was alone at the reception area, and he walked in, looked at me, sat down, and I said to him, would you like to check in? He didn't respond. Several times I asked him if he was okay, he didn't respond. And then I went and called my supervisor, who came out and spoke to him, and he came up and said, I don't want to be checked in by a Black person. I thought, wow, okay. So, good on her. She walked away and said, well, she's the receptionist tonight. You either allow her to check in or you're going to have to wait. And he waited. He waited 45 minutes for the next shift to come in because he didn't want me to check him in. So that was it. And then I had somebody spat at me. Another incident, a gentleman who just did not want me to speak to him or give him any instructions as well. And he just spat at me and said, go back to where you're coming from, you Black bitch. So, and those were the 2 incidents that really stood up with me. But in terms of school business management, I did my CSBM before I started working in a school. And, I had to travel to, I can't remember where it was now, Stephen, where was it? I can't remember, but I had to travel up. And I was the only Black person in this cohort. And I thought, oh, well, that's fine, because not working in a school and having to do this course, I thought I would learn a lot from all of my colleagues that were there. But very quickly, I realized that wasn't going to happen. I was isolated. People would not allow me to be a part of groups. I tried to make conversation with people. It didn't work, and I was isolated. And again, in those times, I wasn't really thinking, must be because I was quite naive, that it had anything to do with the color of my skin. I thought, well, maybe because I am not a school business manager, maybe they don't want to associate with me. And then started like Sheryl, I went to my first conference in 2011, only Black person in the room. I would go to conferences like 3 times per year, only Black person in the room. In these areas as well, I would try to have conversations with people, walk up to a group. I remember walking up to a group of colleagues once one of these conferences and said, good morning, nobody responded, tried to make conversation, and it was like I was not there. And so I walked away. And I had a lot of these experiences. And, other subtle little things, like I would walk into a meeting and I would be given a tea and coffee order because that's what I was there for. I would sit in a conference and or another meeting, and somebody would say to me, are you sure you're in the right place? I've had quite a number of those incidents where people just look at me and just think, you don't belong here. And again, stupidly or naively, just thinking it has nothing, it must be because they don't know me, can't have anything to do with the color of my skin. Until one day at a conference, I was talking to this particular this young lady, Nikki Messer, I'll never forget. She, you know, she's a wonderful woman. And she came, I was standing at a table alone, and she came over to me and, you know, started talking to me. And a few other people came over because they knew her, not because of me. And one young lady said to me, "So where are you from?" And I said, "I am from East London." And the look on her face just said it all. And she just said, "Oh," and she walked away. And what that did to me was, it made me think that, okay, not only am I being discriminated against because of the color of my skin, but now there's discrimination because of where I live or where I come from, because of my culture. And so I stopped telling people where I came from. You know, I just thought it doesn't make any sense adding to what's already there. I would tell people where I worked, but I wouldn't tell them that I lived there. And that just got worse as I went along. And when I started working at my first school, they were in the middle of building schools for the future project. And my head teacher was a white woman, a lovely woman. And she took me around to the project manager and just basically introduced me and said, as of today, you will deal with this lady. And he looked at me up and down, and he never said a word to me. I reached out to shake his hand, he didn't take it. And I said, okay, here we go. And he would not have any communication at all with me until I had to sort of report it. And then his communication was all by email. And then one day, one of the workers came in and said to my head teacher, "I can tell you that he's not going to deal with this young lady because he says there's no way he's going to take any instruction from a Black woman." You know, and it was just little things like that just sort of, you know, I just had to learn how to deal with those subtle little things. Some of them, as I said, were overt. Some of them were quite subtle. You know, and when I have a conversation with my peers at the time, there were lots, and as Sheryl said, in London, there were quite a number of Black and Asian school business leaders, but they wouldn't go out. So we'd go to conference and I'll see myself, just me, and I know they were there. And when I had conversations with them, they would tell me the same thing. They don't feel comfortable going to these conferences because they feel like people are just looking at them and wondering why are they there. They feel really, really uncomfortable. And so, you know, I started a network in London as well because of that reason. Like I'm saying, if these people are going to be so afraid of going out because of the color of their skin, then I'm going to try and bring the conferences to them so they don't feel like they're losing out on whatever training or motivation speakers or anything that is out there that needs to come to them, that they're not losing out. But when all these surveys are being done, and you know, I quite agree with a number of them. I think, as I said to Stephen in the past, you know, there's a lot of surveys out there. A lot of people are doing a lot of surveys, and you're thinking, all right, so when are we going to stop doing the surveys and actually start doing something about what survey is showing you? And so for you know, it's for that reason I'm quite grateful to be a part of this today, because at least, you know, the people in the room are people who have a sort of authority or power to start doing something about it. But I would love, you know, after today to really start seeing things being done, changes being made, policies being put in place and implemented and followed through, and, you know, and people being held to account, because as Sheryl was saying, you know, with the recruitment, I have seen it so much where this unconscious bias that we're talking about now, that seems to be taking a storm now, has happened so much in recruitment, where, you know, I've watched my colleagues just put applications aside because it was somebody from Africa, or, you know, it was a Somalian, this, or, you know, just put it aside, forgetting they don't even look at the qualifications or the experience. They just look, they go straight to the back of the page, look what, you know, where these people are from, and what their age is, and put the applications aside. And I think we have got to get to a place where the color of your skin cannot be a determinant for where you get to in this world. That should not determine you know, whether or not you get a job, an interview for a job, or whether or not you move up on a scale, or whether or not you get the recognition that you deserve. And I think, you know, for me, I am really sick and tired of just the subtle discrimination that is out there, because a lot of people have learned they're not going to be overt anymore, but they will not do away with that subtleness. Yeah, it's still there. And I think until we start holding these people accountable, it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. I mean, I'm working with a group, with a trust at the moment. There are 15 members on this trust, and there are 2 Black people, and I'm one of them. And they're open. They want to do something about diversity. They want to do something about inclusion. But again, from the top, it's really hard, because we're talking about white men who are over 60, who are just really embedded in their culture, embedded in the way they want to do things, and not really wanting to change. And for 2 Black women, we're both women and both under 50, for us to have a voice there is really, really difficult, but we're not giving up, because there are 6 schools in this trust, and they have a lot of diversity in terms of the pupils. But when it comes to the workforce, there isn't any diversity at all. And the board reflects that. So it's little things like this, and I'm glad Emma is here, because, you know, I know they're doing, you know, some surveys as well, and a lot of work is being done on trying to get trust boards to sort of implement some of these strategies to make sure that they diversify and they're inclusive. But a lot of work, there's a lot of work to be done. There is a lot of work to be done. But, you know, it can be done. If the right mindset is there, and if we are committed to doing it, it can be done. And I think, you know, I applaud Stephen as well, you know, for getting this together, because having somebody like Professor Miller on board, I think is going to be really, really good for us. So, you know, I have a lot more, you know, experience, but I'm not going to share them here. I think you get the gist. You know, for me, it has affected my life quite a lot, because I'm still very conscious of when I get asked, where are you from or what do you do? I think twice about answering. I think twice about, you know, is this then going to be another conversation about the color of my skin or my background or the food I eat or don't eat and stuff like that, you know, because it seems when you tell people those things, the first thing they launch into is, oh, what is your culture like, or what do you do? I think, what does that have to do with the fact that I'm doing a job? So those are little things I would really, really, really like to see change. And but the big picture is the color of my skin should not determine whether or not I'm good enough for a job. If I have the experience, if I have the qualifications, I should be treated equally. And, you know, that's where I would like to see for any other SBM that is coming up, or anywhere else, as a matter of fact, whether there's a teacher or because I know they have a lot of experiences with this as well. But that's where I would like us to get in this country, to be able to say, we have equality, we have inclusion. And with that, I'll hand over to Abby.
Well, slightly different and quite similar to Sandy. We came into the UK same year, yay. I was born in Nigeria. I went to a selective school in Nigeria, went to what they classed then as one of the top universities, studied accounting, simply because it was actually the first thing on the list in alphabetical order in the brochure. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Finished, became a chartered accountant, worked as a money market trader. I would say quite confidently that I think I was in the top 5% when it comes to earning in the country. My mom was the personal physician to 2 first ladies before she retired. So not rich, but I think we were comfortable enough. By the time I came into the UK, I came on a spouse visa, got married, came on a spouse visa. I didn't I didn't have the language for racism. Actually, racism was not something on my mind because I have never had an experience of being an ethnic minority. Never been ethnic minority, just came into the UK all, you know, whatever it is, it can't be racism. It's surely everybody thinks the way I do. Everybody's got something similar, you know, with the way this is. So that made it incredibly difficult actually to put some words to the experiences I was having and to explain it. Because every time things happened, it was, what is it about me? What do I need to do differently? How do I change it? And no matter what I changed, it never got better. You know, I would register with agencies, for example, I'd get there and then they go, well, you schooled in Nigeria. We don't even know if you know how to use a fax machine, blah, blah, blah. We don't even know if you know how to use Word. And I was quite proficient. I'd go and do the ECDL, come back with some new certificate. It'll be a new excuse. You know, at some points, I was using my full name until someone went, one of the agencies went, look, your last name's too long. Can I shorten it? I was like, nope. Okay, your first name's too long. Let's at least shorten your first name to Abby because people can't pronounce it and they're never going to ask you to come back. You know, did what I could with that, which was quite interesting. Then on a different level, we live outside London, and where I lived when I was pregnant with my son, I remember then there'd been a case where it was claimed that a Black person had raped a little girl, blah, blah, blah. We didn't know what was happening. And the police actually wanted, Essex police at the time wanted all Black men in my area to march to the police station and submit themselves for inspection to be excluded from, I don't know, from being suspects, which I found really strange. And this was in 2005. So I found myself sitting down every day, hoping my husband would come home from work in one piece without being grabbed or made, you know, marched to a police station. And he made national news. A few months later, almost a year later, it turned out the child was lying, but that never made national news and we weren't told. I went looking for the news. I found that really strange. You know, that was one of the things that I kept going, what is it about us? You know, what's going on? Okay. And then I worked in FE. Well, I worked in different places as a temp because I couldn't. Ended up in an FE college where the kids, at that time, the area that I lived in, well, we moved to a different area because my son's got severe autism and we moved to get him into one of the top autism schools in our area. The BMP then won, and everyone was really vocal with the BMP, my local area. You'd get leaflets through the door that were kind of uncomfortable to read. And then I'd go into work and the office felt very, they felt, we're being very liberal, progressive. They allowed the students to have this chat where one of the most vocal kids on the chat room had a swastika, but with the British flag in the background. And he kept talking about immigrants. He kept talking about getting in the lift with them and wanting to hurt some of them because they come in and then they get keys to new flats and all of that. While people sometimes moderated and said, watch your language, I felt the things that pained them were actually factually inaccurate, but nobody was addressing everything the kids were saying. And for me, there were days I'd go into the lift and a lot of them expressed that sentiment about hating them, about how they stole stuff and how they want to hurt them and how it's hurting their families. And I'd get into the lift with the students and I'd be going, which one of these kids is it? Who's going to hit me now? Then during the workday, I would make a call home to my au pair at the time, just to make sure my kids were okay and BMP weren't actually marching by the door and making them unsafe, And then I'd be rushing home. My husband and I would rush home to make sure we're home on time with the kids and that their journeys were safe. So over a period, there's a point where you're not feeling safe at all. So that was difficult. And anyway, so I moved from that. 2010, I moved into academies. That was good. There are a lot of things that I found because I'm kind of adventurous. I didn't want to work in London. I was tired of being the only other in the room. But at the same time, I just thought, actually, it's better being the only other than them not having anyone at all. So I'm sort of going out to different places, interviewing. And one day I said to a friend of mine who's a principal, I was like, I don't know the answer to this question. We have a member of staff who might not accept you. What would you do about it? And I said, every time I go for an interview, I get that question and I'm not sure what they're asking because I seem to answer it wrong all the time. And then he went, that's racist. They shouldn't be asking it. Until that point, it never occurred to me because I always get that question, you know, and my answer used to be, I'm not sure why I'm the one who's meant to be dealing with it. But after a while, I just thought maybe the question is just to see whether I'm going to be what they call a troublemaker. They didn't want any trouble. So they're just gauging to see if I would make trouble or if I would go quietly or do, you know, suck it up and do the work. Because I'm thinking you shouldn't ask me if you're aware of a problem, you deal with it. So that I found really strange. And then, you know, I'm currently on the advisory panel for ISBL. I've also got a slight issue because I've got an intersectionality that kind of multiplies certain problems in that I've got Asperger's, I'm on the spectrum. So certain things are amplified. You know, certain issues with intersectionality tend to be amplified. So that's part of the reason why I find it incredibly difficult to, you know, I'm kind of self-employed now, so I work interim roles. I've tried to develop what I call a middle leadership program for BAME people that I think would help people move, because moving from the mindset of I had no concept of racism, I've never been an ethnic minority, to being one, I found out there were different things I needed to appreciate about the culture I'm in, the settings I'm in. You know, the place I worked before, for example, staff do a lot of things in the pub. But then I look around and I think we've got Sikh staff members and we've got Muslim staff members and we've just got general BAME staff members who do not have a pub culture. If they're not coming and you do everything in the pub and the pub is where it all happens, the reality is that by nature it's excluding certain people, but most people are not aware of that. So being, like I said, not being a minority, you think everybody does things this way, but they don't. So, you know, I had to sort of keep talking to the SLT about it. And I'm going to quickly bring one up that I found very interesting was when I realized then that we had all the ethnic minorities tend to be support staff. We didn't have any who were teachers. And 97% of the students were ethnic minority. And I just kept thinking, why is this not happening? I looked at the interviews and then I realized that actually they kept insisting that they wanted actually Oxbridge first, then Russell Group universities. When I started to challenge the recruitment processes going, why haven't we taken this guy? He's got a PhD and he's from, say, I don't know, Pakistan, China, wherever. I'd get, oh, he doesn't have A levels. And I'll be thinking, but he has a PhD. And then there was a point where I did some research and went back. I said, I've actually discovered there are only about 7 countries in the world that do A levels, maybe 10 max. So we are excluding quite a lot of our pool by doing it this way, but they kept insisting on certain things. And I felt that I think it's an excuse, to be honest, in some of those situations. I remember walking out of one recruitment after I was sort of really disappointed by who they had gone with. And as soon as I stepped out, someone came to me and said, let me guess, white male. And I was like, who? She said, I don't know who your candidates are, but whoever got the job is white male. And she was right. That was the only white male of the group. And at that point, it never occurred to me because I just kept trying to push why every other person had a good point and why they specifically asked certain questions of this person who got the job that made him look like a better candidate. The questions were quite even, you know. Sorry, Paul, just a minute. And then I also went back to look at our disciplinary, which I would challenge, which makes it incredibly difficult as well. I looked at what we've done with the disciplinaries and realized that where somebody actually raises a complaint about somebody and they have certain characteristics, even if they wanted it to be formal, there was a tendency to push them towards an informal resolution. And where people raised, even where it started as an informal resolution, certain people get the justice end of the disciplinary policy. Certain people tend to get the mercy end of the disciplinary policy. I just went and I looked at the outcomes over a period of time, and I've done that at 2 or 3 different schools, and it tends to be the same. The person who fails upwards, they have certain characteristics. Those who get disciplinary and have to go the hard route, they have certain characteristics. And I think over time, it's, it makes it incredibly difficult for people. So that's just a small part of my experience, not to talk of places I go in where people give me their coats, or they tell me to sit in the corner and take the notes, even though I call the meeting. And then as an SRMA, get into a school, and I remember my last one, the guy walks in and goes, who are you? For all I know, you could be the cook or the cleaner. And I'm sitting at the head of the table. You know, you have a meeting in this room with somebody. You should know it's me. Once he left, the person who was with me was like, that was terrible. I was like, I actually didn't notice. you know. So on the plus side, my being on the spectrum has been both a blessing and a curse, because when my staff then used to come and go, well, I went to Oxford, I would go, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. I can't do anything for you about it, but I'll try and teach you to be a better person. So yeah, so I have had to find ways of dealing with those. But thank you for your time. And thanks for your patience, Paul. I believe I'm handing over to Lorna now.
Thank you so much, Abby. And I've got to say that I think I'm going to have to just respond to so much of what's been said, because you've talked about things that are not microaggressions, and I know that there is a trajectory and that things have improved to a certain extent, but those things that you've experienced, Sandy and Abby and Sheryl, are, you know, they're racism, and they are part of, you know, our lived experience. But I just find it really moving that you're able to express that. I've brought along a prop. Now I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Lorna Legg. I'm a head teacher in a small village primary school in Devon, pretty much, not exactly completely, but pretty, you know, on the surface monocultural. I've brought along a prop because I'm a primary head teacher, and so that's what, you know, we do. And this is my prop. It's my mum and dad. It's from 1966 when they got married in London. And my mum had come over from Jamaica, and she'd come over just to finish her training as a nurse. And she got here, and when she landed at the docks at Bristol, she'd got, her brother was already here, and so she's got some family. But she said, from all the images in her head about the mother country, as it was sort of characterized, it was so grey. She expected it to be green and beautiful, and it was, the ground was grey, the sky was grey, the people were grey, and she hated it. And she coped for a long time. She went to Stratford-on-Avon, and that's where she met my dad. And he was part of a sort of an international group. And then they met with inevitable, at that time, perhaps even now, but inevitable racism, whereby Dad's mum, my grandma, rejected the relationship, wouldn't go to the wedding, and wouldn't countenance other people, other family members going to it. And I really remember finding that photo and lots of others in my parents' wedding album, and finding in the back, tucked into it, all the messages that had been sent out, the invitations that had been sent out, and then the responses, which were saying, I really have to agree with your mother. I'm really sorry. And some of them were quite apologetic, and some of them were just, well, you know, almost, what are you thinking? Now, 55 years later, they're still together. My dad drives my mum completely insane, but, you know, they are a very happily married couple, and their love has been really fundamental in my sister and I coping with, you know, different things in our lives. And I just briefly, before going on to experiences I had as a child, just my grandparents and my grandma, who was, yeah, racist at that time. She ended up living with us. My mother, Saint, looked after her until she died. And my grandmother was a teacher, a primary school teacher, and nobody else in my family was. And she was a teacher at a time when you weren't, you didn't go to university necessarily. She also had to give up when she got married. So, you know, there was, in that sort of, my grandmother's memory is a time we have come a long way, but it was incredible that people had to give up their career when they got married then. And she lived with us after all this had gone on in their history. And I never really picked up on it until I found the messages in the wedding album, and until there would be things like, Grandma would go into the kitchen and Mum would be cooking, and Grandma would lift the lids on the pans and say, "Ooh, early, interesting. And then when she'd gone out, Mum would be really banging things around. And I never really got why she was, but there were microaggressions going on in my own home all the time. And this conflict, this duality between these two groups. And then my Jamaican grandma, who I was only able to go and see once before going over for her funeral. She was such a strong presence, though, in her letters, in her love. And she was really prepared. You know, she gave up her daughter, her only daughter, for the sake of her future. And, you know, so there are these very strong people behind me who help with that going forward. And I don't think I thought about colour, race, identity in that sense until I was about 8, and we moved from Northampton, where we'd been living, and Mum and Dad got married in Hampstead. We lived in Hampstead. In Hampstead, their encounters were with the signs in the, you know, the windows that would say no black, no Irish, no dogs. Yeah. They ended up with a lovely Polish couple who took them in and who looked after me. And then they moved to Northampton. And at that time in Northampton, it was a large junior school. It was really diverse. I was really happy. We moved to a village. And when we moved to a village, suddenly I became aware that there was something fundamentally different. My hair was like really big, but you know, just that's what it was like, that's what it did. And my skin color was clearly different from theirs, but I didn't think about it until we were in a village. And then also there were things like, you know, going to the school fete, the village fete on the village green, and I would suddenly be aware that the kids who called me names at school might call my mum names. And that was the worst thing in the world from me to imagine. And I was terrified of that happening. And I used to do things like scrub my knees to try and make them paler, because kids would pick up on that. You know, so there are all these strange things, these images about yourself. And I remembered, I think it might have been Sandy mentioned about at the airport. So when we went to go to see my grandma in Jamaica, stopping off at that time, you had to stop off in Miami. And at the stopover, they incarcerated us because they thought that we would abscond and try to join the US. And I remember at the time, and I was 10 then, having to fill out a form to state if I was going to commit genocide, xenophobia, or you know, try to get into the United States. So we were just held under armed guard, and we were the only people who were, my mum and I, and everybody else on that flight went on their way, and we went on our way 10 hours later, you know. And so those things stick with you. And my mum, I used to think, why was she so cross with shop assistants? And it would be because they had been watching us. One time, you know, we'd be stopped and they would come to check through our bags because we'd bought so much. It was for my wedding, actually. And we were just comparing things to try to just check what they looked like. And then coming back to the present day, sort of thinking about where we are now. Obviously, 2020 has just been a year like no other. And I think we discovered through, we joined a group, the NAHT. At that time, it was the Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic group. We're now the Leaders for Equality group. And that was a bit like hearing Sheryl and Sandy and Abby, everybody sharing what they'd experienced. And all around, obviously it is 1 year ago since George Floyd was murdered. And I'd attended in the summer Black Lives Matter meetings and protests in Sidmouth, sunny Sidmouth, and was really cheered and heartened to see how there were lots of people there, largely white, but the support was wonderful. And there was this process of learning so much about things that we shared on our WhatsApp group and so on. But there were just staggering things that weren't about American racism. It was about, you know, Black British history. It was about racism in our country, you know, that we had the fact that when slavery was abolished in Britain, 300 years after it began, the government compensated the slave owners to such an extent, 20 billion in today's money, that only got paid off in 2015. What? What? And, you know, amongst all the families who benefited, there were 2 chancellors of the Exchequer, 2 prime ministers. So their ancestors gained from this huge amount. And in Devon alone, 85 families who still hold huge swathes of the countryside gain their money from that. And the fact that in April 2019, in Wandsworth, there was a poor woman. She was a nurse and Black. And the reason I remember it from the news is because of my mum just coming off night duty, sitting in her car, dropping off a friend. And a car screeches to a halt in front of her. It's a police car. And they're demanding for her to get out. And if she doesn't get out, they will break the windows. And she says she's scared. Rightly so, because of things that have happened. And then they drag her out anyway. They do smash the window eventually. They do drag her out. They arrest her for resisting arrest, and she's done nothing. And of course, there have been other, you know, more high-profile cases of sports personalities and so on who've been taken, arrested because of these things, because of racism. So we sort of were sharing all these facts and learning about them, and things like Jane Elliott's wonderful blue eyes, brown eyes experiments. So this is all head teachers. And then we have, thanks to Natalie Pettifer and Paul Whiteman, who I know is talking later, we're able to soon publish a book which is lots of people's in education's experiences, called You Are Not Alone. And I think that's the thing that, you know, there is this idea of you cannot be what you cannot see, and how important that is for our children to have role models. So it's important to end that cycle. So important, and to learn about people like Naira Chamberlain, amazing mathematician, Maggie Alderin-Pocock, astronomer, and the wonderful Floella, who actually in the 70s was just a goddess to me on television, and still is, Baroness. Bushra Nazir, who spoke to us, CEO of a group of schools. You know, people have done amazing things, and that history has been suppressed. And I think it's vital that what we do is we push on. So one of the things I'm doing is, and have done, is in my school, just a last thing. We have 2 houses in our school, probably did when I was in a village primary school as well. And the houses are Drake and Raleigh. So Drake, okay, you know, he did go around the world. That's a pretty big deal. But he was also a slaver. And Raleigh had to look really hard to work out what he'd actually done. So he brought back, as I shared with the children, the potato and tobacco. And so talking with my year 6 children, we thought, yeah, quite a lot's happened in 400 years since they were around. There are a lot more people that we could probably go to for our role models. And, you know, who've killed fewer people and caused fewer, you know, less misery. So they did research and did PowerPoints, and we had Malala Yousafzai, we had Mary Anning, because we're on the Jurassic Coast. We had Greta Thunberg, because she's just a marvel. We had Maggie Alderin-Pocock, and we had Rosa Parks. So the children suggested 3 out of the 5 of those. And then we also had David Attenborough, and he was kind of elected as one of our houses. So we've got David Attenborough, And now we have Mary Anning, but we had a proper sort of election, and we talked about it, and I shared it in our newsletter so that everybody could see who our people were. And I think it's also wonderful. Out of this group, I've met Rihanna, who's an executive head in Devon as well, and she is part African and also a Muslim. And we've done a Leaders for Equality, well, Let's Talk About Equality training for 37 heads in Devon, because Devon has peculiar needs. We don't have go-to diversity. We need to be really clear about addressing, though, challenging the issues that there are, and bringing out the diversity that there is, because there is a lot. There's actually a lot in our past as well. So finally, I think it's just so important. I started off with a picture of my parents and their love, and it's a really simple thing that we actually do need to have more love. We need to have less hate, and only through changing what our children learn and how they learn about it can we really, for the future, have that freedom. And there were just two things I wanted to say, two really important films, if you get to watch them, if you haven't already. So one is Jane Elliott's A Class Divided, which is just amazing. The hour-long version has all the children who went through this process and the positive impact it had on their lives. And then the other one is by Latanya Shannon, and co-produced or produced by Steve McQueen, who did the Small Axe, the series. But it's called Subnormal, a British scandal, and that aired just on the 20th of May. So if you haven't seen it, it was gutting, but so pertinent to why there are still difficulties, inequalities, particularly with, as Tony Sewell put it, the Caribbean experience. So I'm going to leave it there, and thank you for your time.
Fascinating contributions, colleagues, and we so didn't want to interrupt those lived experiences, because it's so important for people with those lived experiences to feel, you know, validated in being respected, being given the time, the space, the stage to speak, and so I think we've learned a whole lot. So I'm gonna hand over to Antonia, Catherine, and Barbara to make their contribution around institutional strategies and impacts in this area. Antonia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this. And I feel, having listened to Sheryl and Sandy and Abby and Lorna in the first part, very privileged to be speaking today. So I'm Antonia Spinks, and I'm the co-leader of Pioneer Educational Trust. So we're a small multi-academy trust in Berkshire. And in cutting this down to 3 minutes now, I will try my best to cover, you know, some of the work that we've done and continue to do. For us, I think that thinking about our pupils and their families, and also the staff in our schools, this last year has not only shone a light on the inequalities in society, but actually exacerbated them in many ways. And so we have, as an organisation, one of our core values is actually to drive equality. And over the years, we have done much work on this organically. So we've organised and hosted a range of professional development opportunities. So, for example, we led a women's leaders seminar across our schools and beyond. We've hosted diverse educators as well. We've worked on implementing and embedding the use of equality impact assessments to make sure that all of our HR policies actually enhance our offer through doing the equality impact assessments to make sure that we can enhance our offers. So, for example, enhanced leave for parental bereavement or for families with sick children, for example. And we've also spent lots and lots of time looking at all manner of issues relating to EDI from intersectional platforms. And we hope through all of that work that we've created an open and safe culture within our trust. But we've been reflecting over the past year that actually this is a hinge point for us in an organisation, and that we want to take all of the kind of organic or more implied work that we've been doing over a number of years and make it much, much more explicit moving forward. So we're just at the point where we are cohering our next our 3-year strategy moving forward for our trust. And one of the 4 priorities that we've identified that we want to focus on is to deliver a really ambitious EDI strategy for our organisation. I'm very conscious, especially listening to all of the lived experiences that colleagues have shared with us this morning, that actually it's a really difficult job to cohere a strategy that makes the difference that we want it to make, because there are so many aspects of this work. And just like with the curriculum, where you have to decide what goes in and what's left out, the same thing goes, I think, in this area. What do we do to make a really lasting difference? And one of the things that we believe in organisationally is doing fewer things better. So what we've done this year is we have established an EDI committee. It was really important to us to democratise this space. So we have a committee that works across the organisation that's representative of executive and senior leaders, governors and trustees, business leaders, and also volunteers from within our wider staff body. And we felt that that was really important so that we could communicate to our whole organisation the importance of this work for our community. We wanted to make sure that there were people that could make decisions part of that, and also making sure that colleagues could provide their necessary perspectives, just as our colleagues have done here, that can inform this piece of work. So we have identified 5 areas that we want to work on. Those are curriculum, pupils' personal development, CPDL, leadership development specifically, and business management as well. And so for the purposes of this audience, I'm just going to speak to those last 2 points very, very quickly. So in relation to leadership development, we're looking to focus on providing leadership opportunities for people from underrepresented groups in leadership in schools, such as business leaders, such as senior and executive leaders as well, to make sure that leaders can lead authentically, to make sure that they've got access to supportive networks and equity of opportunity. And fundamental to that is coaching and mentoring, and I know that that was mentioned in the ISBL's reports. And in terms of business management, we're going to review all of our recruitment processes, and we've already heard a lot about that as part of these conversations. And we're also going to look to support the establishment of employee reference groups or affinity groups within our organisation, to make sure that there's a space for constructive conversation, for networking and support from inclusive allies as well. And flexible working is another aspect of that work that we're working on at the moment. But as I say, we want to do fewer things better. And at the moment, we're looking within these strategies to look at what systems and structures need developing and implementing, and what metrics we want to put against this particular work, how we're going to monitor and audit all of this work to make sure that it is having the impact that we want it to have in embedding these things over the coming 3 years. So I know I can see within this work that it's absolutely necessary, and there's so much possibility abound, and good intentions must be translated into organisational impact and action, mustn't it? And the significant role, obviously, that business leaders play within that particular piece of work. And so I feel very privileged to have been here to speak about it, and I'm getting through some of the content, I hope, as quickly as I can here. But I wanted to just close on saying that obviously I'm speaking here as the co-leader of a multi-academy trust, but actually I'm also a woman leader. I'm also the granddaughter of an Egyptian Jewish immigrant to this country who faced the most horrendous xenophobia when she came to this country. And I'm also an English teacher, so there is a poem that I absolutely adore, which is Imtiaz Darka's poem This Room, and in it, it's got the most powerful line, I think, which is, "This is the time and place to be alive." And actually going to the points that Paul and Stephen and others have made, actually perhaps we're on the cusp of actually making a significant difference in our schools by pulling together all of these leaders and really going explicitly to address the inequalities that we know exist within organisations and society more widely. So I hope that kept reasonably to time, and thank you again for inviting me along. And I know that I'm going to pass along to Catherine now, I believe.
Thanks, Antonia. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to everyone who shared their lived experiences. I feel completely humbled by that. And again, as Antonia said, very privileged to be in the space where you're sharing those. So thank you so much for your courage in sharing those very moving experiences. So I'm Cathy Anwar. I'm the CEO of Summit Learning Trust, and we are based in Birmingham, a relatively small trust. We've got 8 academies, 4 primary, 3 secondary, and a big 6th form college. Very, very diverse, beautifully diverse academies, not very many white children at all. And actually getting more beautifully diverse staff actually over the last 4 years. I've been in place 4 years and things are improving, not where they need to be, but they're steadily improving. And really for the purpose of today, I've just split down really the work that we've been doing and how I see the work going forward. And I think probably this has always been a real passion of mine, a real driver of mine in terms of intersectionality. I'm the mother of 2 mixed race children. Their father's Pakistani, so I have that imperative and that drive as well. I think for me, the real driver for institutional change has got to be leadership, and the leadership belief, the leadership drive, the leadership narrative, the leadership relentlessness, the leadership boringness. She's banging on about it again. It must be really important then. Never, never stopping it being in every breath and every meeting and every conversation that you have until they just shrug and think, well, do you know what? Easier just to get on with it then, isn't it? Yes, it is. Just do it. So that compelling narrative for us has been really, really important. And particularly with the communities that we have, creating that really unarguable hook for everybody for our work. And that's all about social justice for us. It's about improving the lives of every child, every family, every postcode, one day at a time. And that's the mantra, and that's just what we repeat, and that's our mission, and that's what we're sticking to really, and that's the social justice. And no one can argue with that, can they? You know, nobody can come back and go, no, actually, we don't want people to be, you know, socially equal. We don't want that, or it's very hard to anyway. There's a compelling counter argument for all of it. The third point is, again, that relentless communications and messaging, really making sure you've got people at every level who are those champions, feeding it through down into every institution. And when I say staff, I mean all staff, of course. I don't just mean our teaching staff. I mean all of our 500 plus support staff with a motto of support to improve. They are absolutely involved in this. And I was just thinking as you were talking and sharing your experiences, particularly you, Sheryl, actually I'm quite proud that we do have quite high proportion of colleagues of colour who are our senior business partners across HR, across estates, across finance, and that's great. And I need to go back and check the proportions of that, but actually it's pretty high, certainly way beyond 3%, probably more like 25–30%, but you know, that's I need to check on that really. The fourth point is that all this rhetoric, all this lovely rhetoric, and me waltzing around the place going, this is all really important, there has to be and must be underpinned by the practical things that actually take place and happen, and resources and funding. And we, you know, we've heard about the importance of funding on a macro scale, but micro scale too. We have an area of our budget committed to this area. It has to be overt. People have to know the money is behind it, and therefore we have bought into an organisation that's delivered training, coaching, supported us in our annual trust conference, which was Unity and Diversity, fabulous event in April. But that's not enough, that's just the start. And what's really great is that we've connected with so many people who didn't have a voice in our trust before, and so many younger staff and staff who haven't got positions of seniority particularly have come directly to me and say, this is great, we've got a voice, we didn't have one before, we now can speak, we have a space. And we need to carry on with that momentum. So the same thing's happening next year. We have a roadmap, we have a trust strategy, our trust board are right behind that. They're going out for 3 new trustees at the moment. Their first parameter going to the organisation that's helping us is diversity. We have to have a diverse trust board, look at the communities we serve. We have to reflect that. That's the first thing you need to think about when you're helping us recruit for the trustees onto our board. And finally, it's about the impact, of course, isn't it? That those voices, those people finding a voice, those people feeling safer, welcome, belonging, part of decision making and all of that. Improvement in representation for the children. They need to see people that look like them. People we appoint need to see colleagues who look like them on the interview panel and everywhere. Curriculum changes, I haven't really touched on that, but of course, that's happening too. And really changing our narrative, changing the everyday language that we use and everyday discussions that we use. So the phrase microaggression, everybody knows what it means. We're not there yet. We're really not there yet. We're away from that. But the roadmap is in place, and the roadmap stretches over the next 3 years, and then we'll review it. It's not, oh, we're done that now. It's part of our life now at Summit, and that's not going to change in the foreseeable future. And I think that's all from me. I think I managed to cram that into probably more than 3 minutes, but I think I'm handing over now to Barbara.
Hi there, can you hear me? I'm not on mute, am I? No, lovely. Thank you very much. I'm actually standing in for our Director of Education with very little sort of expectation, but what I will do is I work for AET, which is, I think, the second largest multi-academic trust. I've not long been with them, but my title is People Strategy and EDI Lead. So AET has made a commitment to this agenda for the next 5 years at least. And I'm going to try not to repeat all the other things that you've said, because I think it's nice to take it in as wide a direction as I possibly can. What I particularly like, though, is the intentionality which they've set off. You know, this commitment comes from our trustees, and it filters all the way down. And I believe it started following some unconscious bias training that we undertook at the back end of 2020, recognizing that unconscious bias training is absolutely fantastic for raising awareness, but it doesn't stick forever. Unless you take some further actions, it's quite challenging. And so we have created a number of short programs around 4 pillars: disability, race and ethnicity, gender equality, and sexual orientation and gender identity. And every week we have a 15-minute session delivered by an expert from that field that is for head teachers, teachers, support staff, team managers, anybody really, around some key themes. And we've also created quite a wide range of material that can be used if you're looking to add something to a existing curricula, because as we set up new courses, we're going to be filtering that through the lenses of equality and diversity, so that we can get better inclusion, better representation, visual, or even in challenging, you know, sort of cognitive diversity, so that we can sort of broaden that out. AET has also done quite a bit in terms of we recognise the lack of diversity amongst our head teachers, teaching staff, with quite, I think we've got like 77% female, so the gender issue is less of an issue, but other areas it's quite difficult. Some of that is challenging because we don't actually have the data, because people have chosen not to share their data with us, and that speaks a little bit to perhaps either not understanding how that data might be used, or not trusting that the data will be used in a reasonable, helpful way. So we've got to work on that. We recognise that we're on a journey, but I think the fact that we are being intentional with it over the course of the 5 years, I think it will wax and wane, but I think we will shape and change stuff. In terms of our pipelines, our recruitment pipelines, there's quite a lot of work being done on very many fronts. In terms of those who are with us, who stay with us, we developed quite a number of courses which are not just about addressing the inequity that exists in terms of racial terms or disability terms or anything like that. That's there, and that's there for people to take care of. But in terms of opening doors and encouraging, supporting people through those doors, definitely have to be very active and very intentional with that. We've created recently, I've just worked on some affinity groups, and they're very new. So Antonia, I was very keen to speak to you. That they are very new. I've come from local authority where these are well grounded, so I know what good could look like. But we're all just on that journey. And we've got another part of the affinity group that looks at policy and practice. So it means that the marginalised, the voice of the unheard, that gets crowded out when you're trying to do stuff, can sort of start to come through. And I think given a year or so, these groups will be well grounded and good to go. We've got a really well established gender equality group called Remarkable Women, and 18 months down the line, we're looking at them and thinking, yes, they're there, you know, they're doing great stuff, great work. But I think we're on a journey. I think we're all, from the sounds of it, we're all on a journey, probably at just different bits, but we're all on a journey towards equality. And I think that somebody mentioned at the top end when they were talking about lived experience that the important thing is to take some action. Start by self-reflecting. You know, each school will have its own culture, its own set of people, and you have to work within that. So I think it's really important to start there. You know, what is the circumstances on the ground here, and what can we do, whether we start with the curriculum or we start with the recruitment of more diverse people, or we're looking at the experience, the lived experiences. But I think whatever you do, start somewhere and get going, because you might not get it right. You probably won't get it right. But, you know, one of the beauties of this particular space is that if you try something that doesn't work, try something else. There's a lot to try, there's a lot to be done, and there's an easy way of coordinating and moving it forward. Capture your best practice, see what you can learn from the experiences of the things that you've done. We have a project board, and you know, we meet monthly, and we're just looking at the various things that we're committed to delivering. In fact, we're just about to start a planning session for the next school session. But there is no right or wrong way. There's just the way that suits your school, that environment, that, you know, that takes account of your stats, your demographics, and try and keep just moving forward with it. Like I say, it's a journey. We're not there yet. We've got quite a lot of fires in different pipelines, and sometimes it is difficult to keep track of it, even via the project board, because we're doing curriculum, we're doing recruitment, we're doing learning and development, and we're trying to really get to a point where everybody feels that sense of belonging. You know, whether you're a student, a teacher, whether you're the dinner lady, the caretaker, or the head teacher, that you feel that sense of belonging, that you buy into that, because I think only then will we truly be able to sort of create children who can think for themselves, challenge, you know, bad practice, and call these things out with confidence. So there's an awful lot going on. I really look forward to being invited back to hear more. I thoroughly have enjoyed this. For someone who was asked to just parachute in and say a few things, I'm thinking, wow. But I think it's great that we're having these conversations now. I think it's great that it's a bit of a shame that it took the death of somebody in another country to make us all pause and truly get a grasp of what's going on here in our own country. We have our own history of deaths in police custody. It shouldn't have taken that, but we are where we are. And I'm a firm believer that wherever you are, keep moving. Don't stop the momentum. Once you've got some traction, even if you're going at baby steps, you're moving forward. This agenda has been around a long time. I sincerely hope that it isn't around, you know, as many more years as I've seen gone by. But I suspect it's one of those that's going to nurse. It's going to need to be nursed because people feel uncomfortable. You know, we're not yet comfortable about being uncomfortable to have a conversation about diversity. We're not yet comfortable about facing our own contributions towards the lack of diversity, sometimes the lack of inclusion. We're not yet comfortable with being called out. But I do remember when we were talking about mental health a couple of years back, that's exactly where people were. Today, we talk about this openly and honestly. You know, you see adverts on the TV, we talk about it in schools, in workplaces, and I think that's where we can be with the EEDI. We've just got to keep forging ahead, keep pushing ahead, and yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry, I think I've waffled on beyond my 3 minutes, but I hope that you'll be able to take something away from what I've said. Thank you very much, Paul. Back to you.
Fascinating contribution, colleagues. You know, and whilst I cue in Natalie and Steve and Emma and Julie R and Julie M and Alison for the sector leaders contribution, the words I hear coming up from certainly this session is about leadership and intentionality, being deliberate, and as Kathy said, you know, it's that drive, it's that belief, it's every breath and it's every meeting. I like that, I capture that, you know, and I think that is that intentionality. And then you talk about, and Tanya talked about, you know, the hinge point. Here is a fork in the road, and here is such a moment and a moment in time, and what are we going to do, and which direction are we going to go? But and then you built on that so helpfully and so skillfully, Barbara, in saying it's a journey, you know, and pace the work. It's not a sprint. And I think it's really, really interesting just hearing, you know, people talking about what is happening at institutional level, which builds so nicely on the personal stories, and now to give way to the sector leaders to see the work that they are doing in this space as well. So fascinating and really, really helpful contributions, colleagues. So I'm going to pass over to Natalie, and then Steve, and then Emma, and then Julian, and Alison. Colleagues.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you to everyone for their kind of input so far. It's been really powerful and moving, and really welcome kind of the opportunity to hear from everyone. I think just to kind of, before we start, people kind of already use this phrase, but I think, you know, NHT is, you know, as a school leadership union, really recognises that kind of critical role that leaders play in the system, and you know, that kind of need to support and grow all leaders, kind of for the benefit of our members, for pupils, and the system and society kind of more widely, but also recognising obviously at the moment that there is that kind of lack of diversity at that leadership level. I think, you know, to say NHT really is committed to continuing to grow our kind of equality and diversity and inclusion piece. And I think, again, other people have used this phrase, but kind of we recognise it's a journey. You know, work has begun in this area, but I think we recognise that there's a lot more that we can and should and will be doing, and continue to grow within this area. Just to run through a couple of points on what we've been doing, I think we try and centre our work around kind of 3 core areas and different levels. So looking at how we can support members to improve equality, diversity, and inclusion kind of at the school level, within their own schools and trusts, kind of at that kind of system level, about what can we do to support equality and diversity at that kind of sector level within the profession, improving diversity, looking at curriculum, funding, etc. And then taking that step backwards and looking inwards about kind of equality and diversity within NHT and its own democratic structures, because only by kind of doing that can we be really effective at doing that outward facing piece as well. One of the key things I think on that, and Lorna mentioned it briefly in her sharing, is that we have developed 2 new member networks. One is the Leaders for Race Equality Network, and the other is our LGBT+ network, and we're continuing to explore expanding those and developing further networks kind of based on feedback from members. And I think one of the really amazing things that's already kind of coming out and developing from those networks, and again Lorna kind of touched on it briefly, is this new book that some of the members from the Leaders for Race Equality Network have been feeding into and sharing, and that's really building on some of this sharing of this lived experience, and given an opportunity for our members to highlight some of their experiences, some of the barriers that they faced in school leadership, to really bring that into the fore. In terms of other pieces, so you know, we develop advice and guidance to support members in developing the right conditions within their school. That might be developing our own pieces or working with others in the sector to highlight other support that's available for them. I think another thing that's really highlighted by the roundtable today is kind of that engagement with others in the sector, other organisations, to explore ways to kind of improve diversity and inclusion within the profession. And I think that it's really crucial that this really needs to be a sector-wide kind of collective approach. And as Stephen mentioned right at the beginning, you know, we've as the sector organisations are joining together to kind of put out there that statement of intent and highlight our commitment to this work, and the concrete, some of the concrete examples of stuff that we want to do, taking that forward. And obviously there's that kind of critical piece about kind of continuing to engage and kind of challenge government to drive forward this kind of agenda around equality and diversity inclusion, where that's kind of pushing on the funding piece, curriculum, support for the profession. We're also hoping to be developing our first Equality and Diversity member conference later in the year and launching that. So again, to kind of highlight our focus around equality and diversity, and again, really support our members to grow their confidence in this area as well. And alongside that, increasing our training for our officials around equality and diversity inclusion, so we feel more confident in supporting our members in this area. And that's kind of no means an exhaustive list, but hopefully it's a little bit of a kind of a flavour of some of the stuff that we're doing, and kind of really highlights our kind of commitment to continue really focusing on this work and in this area. So I just kind of want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I think I'm handing over to Stephen now.
Great, thanks Natalie. Hi everyone. It's been a real privilege to listen to you and to those experiences today. And firstly, just apologies actually from my colleague and boss Leora, who this is an issue that she's absolutely passionate about, and I'm afraid she can't be here today, but she sent me. So I'm hoping in her absence I'll do a decent job of explaining where CST is at and what we're doing in this area. So 4 strands of our work on equality, diversity and inclusion, I'll just quickly whiz you through today. So strand 1 is about board diversity, and again, that's really pleasing that we've heard that as a theme that's already emerged today. So in October 2020, we published the first in our series of essay collections on board diversity. That was entitled On Diversity, and it's about racial diversity of boards, and it was published in collaboration with Academy Ambassadors and the New Schools Network. Strand 2 is something called the Listening Project. The Listening Project was devised by Lindbert Spencer OBE. It's in some ways, I think, similar to the first section of today's discussion, hearing about colleagues' lived experiences. And the intention of that project is to raise awareness as school and trust leaders strive to work more effectively with all of their colleagues to devise and implement relevant and impactful policies to create and maintain inclusive environments. And then strand 3 is to do with racial equality in the school workforce. So we know from national data that, for example, Black teachers don't have the same access to leadership positions at the same rate as their white peers. So we're working with Ambition Institute, Teach First and the Chartered College to attempt to understand the barriers to entry and progression through the teaching workforce. What we want to do is collate and gather evidence to understand better the nature of the challenges, but also to hopefully see if we can come up with some potential solutions. And that we're hoping will be a piece that it's both quantitative and qualitative in nature as well, that piece of work. And then strand 4 is the school curriculum. And again, we've touched on that, I know in sort of points indirectly in the conversation today, but I think that goes to the heart of education, really, really important. So we're interested in capturing some of the best practice that's out there in relation to the school curriculum and to explore the connections that exist there between diversity, social justice, and this concept of powerful knowledge that, that people are talking about, Michael Young's work, and to see what that looks like in the context of diversity. So we've published actually our first think piece on that subject, which was called Powerful Knowledge as Social Justice, and that was authored by Familola Stewart, who's the head of history at Dixon's Trinity Academy, and Jenny Thompson, who's the principal at Dixon's Trinity Academy. And if you haven't had yet a chance to read that, then please do. And what I'll do perhaps in the remainder of the session today is pop a link in the chat to that for colleagues if you're interested in having a look, because I think it is something quite unique in the discourse I've seen around curriculum and this notion of powerful knowledge. Okay, and so moving on to sort of what we're looking to do in the future for next year, that's to build on those strands of work that I've just outlined there and to continue to extend those, also to support members to create more diverse boards as a means to securing trust excellence. So it's not a bolt-on, it's at the heart of it. And working with school trusts as employers to understand their duties as well as employers to contribute to diversifying the workforce. Okay, so I hope that was useful, but thank you again for what's been a fascinating meeting. And I think I've got a hand over now to Emma.
Thank you, Steve, and everybody else. It has been really, really interesting to follow those important contributions. And I'm also going to try and be ultra brief, and so I will put in the chat a blog that I wrote last September. And it is, Sandy, when you spoke, it really reminded me of how I felt, because NGA has been trying to act to improve the diversity of boards for really quite a long time now. And so sort of what we hoped would be almost the climax of that work was in 2018, when we published the Everyone on Board campaign and video alongside partners in inspiring governance. And very, very naively, I thought it might achieve more change than it did. We very much wanted to be action focused. So the various things people have talked about it being a marathon, not a sprint, are absolutely ripped through now the work that we're doing at NGA. Because we do monitor the data every year. So yes, I'm sorry, we ask you to fill in surveys, those of you that are governing. But we sort of need to do that to see if there's progress. And really, sadly, it's not only there hasn't been progress over the last 10 years while we've been monitoring the data, there hasn't been compared to research from 20 years ago. So that blog that I wrote in September was trying to sort of lift the aspirations and to move from the, oh, we're doing a bit, to actually really embedding this in all the work that we do and encouraging boards to do the same. So the board role is huge, and I'm really pleased that it's been brought up several times, and there are sort of 4 strands to that. The first about its own constitution and its own behaviours and its own inclusiveness. Then secondly, the role alongside school leadership in terms of setting the culture that is around equity, diversity, inclusion for the whole institution. Thirdly, the staff role, and I'm really pleased that we have been talking quite a bit, as we should, with business managers about that HR role, but also about developing people and the board's role in that. And then lastly, the really important, what it's all about, the pupils, and what role can the board take in terms of ensuring that pupils, both in terms of the curriculum, but also we touched on a little bit before, didn't we, about behaviour as well. And there are other aspects of the school life as well as curriculum. And this is why I really want to pay tribute to Stephen, pulling us all together, because there is no way that NGA can make a difference in all those areas on its own. So what I did was sort of publish the things that we were really going to push on, and then work with others, those of you that are more skilled, more knowledgeable around the curriculum, really working to our strengths and building on what each other's doing. So one of the things, like everyone else, that we've done is listen to our members. I'm really conscious of that debate we were having about language. So at the moment, we've just expanded the phrase to Black, Asian and ethnic minority governors and trustees. And I know some of you have been involved in some of those conversations. And I also wanted to pay tribute to the grassroots networks, because we have to be really careful, as well certainly NGA is a white-led organisation, that we are listening to people and taking that on board. So getting that balance right between grassroots change and change from leadership organisations. So we do have a joint group, for example, with BayMed that's been really helpful. So I'm going to now not tell you the answers to what we found out from talking to a lot of people, except to say we have done a research project over the last term and a half, which has revolved around focus groups. And what we have done there is have focus groups for people from different ethnic origins. So we haven't classed everyone together simply under that banner of BAME. So we are writing quite a significant, I hope report, bringing together so much of the learning around boards, both from other sectors, but also from those focus groups. So I'm slightly worried about saying, come and have another conversation, but we are launching that report on June the 29th at an event at 4:30. And I really hope that in terms of that first bit of work about boards and our own constitution and our own inclusivity and behaviour, that will be a real sort of milestone in terms of the next phase of this work. So thank you very much for including us here today. And I now I think handing over to Julie Robinson. Julie.
Thank you, Emma, and I'd like to echo that as well, because I'm sure all of the organisations here really welcome this opportunity to collaborate in this important area. So just a quick rundown of what Independent Schools Council is doing in response to the EDI agenda. We've got an inclusion and diversity group, and that's a cross-sector one. It has 30 members representing the 11 membership organisations that are within ISC, and that includes, we're very fortunate that it includes Lorna Legg, who founded BayMed. We've met 4 times across the last year as a full group, with the intention of supporting schools developing a warmer and ever more inclusive culture for all the stakeholder groups around those schools. So we've organised this in terms of work streams run by subgroups who have further meetings. And I think most of these areas have been covered this morning really well. So we've got one stream of work on legal and compliance issues to inform schools, and recruitment to improve diversity of school staff as well as governors in the independent sector, then training for staff and governors and potentially for parents. And then there's a stream on curriculum and teaching resources, and then a communities stream which intends to collect information that will inform work around the school context and dealing with parents and extending out into the local area with a context for pupils. We've also discussed definitions and vocabulary. So I know ASBL, NGA, you might all be interested to hear that we recently had quite a long discussion about what's the right term, what's the best acronym. And at the moment we're favouring UKME, UK Minority Ethnic, but there have been some really helpful suggestions today. Thank you for those. We're also trying to collect better data, and we're finding that a significant proportion of independent schools, they either don't hold the information, they perhaps don't wish to collect it, but I think they will increasingly understand the importance of disclosing and sharing that kind of data so that we can have a better picture of the national picture. And then on our ISC website, we've got sections including in the members area, a way of flagging resources with overview guidance documents for schools so that they have a way in a practical way as a starting point for adding EDI across their school improvement planning. We've got suggested organisations that schools can contact and case studies. I see that's in the chat now as well. We're also collecting case studies so that we can help share best practice. And we're really keen to do that where our schools are able to contribute. As we all know, this is an area of concern for all of us. And it's great that we can all come together in fora like this to share our ideas. Thank you. I'm going to pass on to Julie M at ASBL.
Thank you very much, Julie R. So really good to be here this morning, afternoon, and thank you from me too for your fascinating and moving and really helpful insights, I think, that we've heard so far. So conscious of time, very briefly from me, here at the Association of School and College Leaders, we've had a particular focus on EDI over the last couple of years. You know, I hope it's something that we've always cared about, but we've had that particular focus because our previous president, our immediate past president, Rachel Warwick, chose equality, diversity, inclusion as her theme for her presidential year, which I think was a really kind of helpful way for us just to sharpen our focus, I think, to have that very kind of senior level sponsorship as a focus. as others have said, we're also very mindful that many organisations and individuals are doing amazing work in this area, and we wanted to make sure that we were building on rather than replicating that. So as a leadership organisation, we've tried to be quite careful about looking at EDI through that lens, and maybe simplistically, we've been kind of focusing on the two major roles that we think leaders can play. You know, one is around leading specific initiatives in their organisations, but the other, you know, just as important, if not more so, is acting as role models themselves to the children and young people in those organisations. So we've kind of looked at it through those two lenses. Some of the work that we've been doing over the last 18 months or so, just to give you a flavour of that, we have established networks, separate networks for our female BAME and LGBT plus members. Again, we've had debates over the terminology here, and our network decided that they did want to be called the BAME network, but there were some very different views within the group on that. So those networks have been meeting. They've been enabling leaders to support each other, but also to raise awareness of issues particularly affecting those groups and bring those to the rest of the organisation. I'll talk in a sec about how we're doing that. We've also been producing information and guidance for our members on how to encourage and embed various EDI related work in their own schools and colleges. So we've done guidance around things like fair and transparent recruitment, developing an inclusive culture, implementing the public sector equality duty, etc. We've also been looking at putting our own house in order a little bit more, you know, very mindful that there is much more that we could do. And we've done that in two ways. One is around looking at our council, which is our policy making body of elected members, and trying to improve the diversity of the people on that council. That is very much a work in progress, but we are making steps in the right direction. And we're also developing our own approaches to inclusivity as an employer. So we are working at the moment on a new people strategy, and we have EDI as a key strand of that work. How we plan to build on that next year, continuing with all of those work streams, we want to build those much stronger links between our networks and our council. We want to make sure that the voices of the members taking part in those networks, they're not just talking to themselves, but that those voices are being heard at the most senior levels of our organisation. So we're building those links. We're looking to establish a network of EDI coaches to support the growth and development of the next generation of diverse leaders. We think that's really important. And finally, we'll shortly be publishing a document that we're calling our Blueprint for a Fairer Education System. It's mainly focused on socioeconomic disadvantage, but given the significant overlap between disadvantage and some protected characteristics, we really hope that that will have resonance with the EDI agenda as well. So just a sense of some of the things we're doing. Thank you.
Julie, I think it's me next.
It is. Sorry, handing over to Alison.
Time is against me. So really quickly, loved it today. And I think there's so much that we can do by working together. Really glad that we are. Things that Chartered College is doing, all in the spirit of openness and recognising, as others have said, we have a long way to go. We have engaged in racial literacy training for all our staff at the Chartered College, and we think that's really important that we begin with ourselves. We're reviewing how we recruit both internally, our staff teams, but also how we look at our council and the diversity on our council. We are making sure that we are including writers and presenters and researchers and authors that represent the full range of humanity, if you like, in terms of educational research. We're looking at the speakers that we invite to come to present at our events. Just yesterday evening, we had an early career event around applying for your first job. And it was a very diverse panel who was speaking. And interestingly, one of the questions that came up in the chat was from someone who said, when I went to an interview at the school, I saw some racialized graffiti and I was worried, what should I have done? I think they only asked that question because they could see that there were people on the panel who would understand. That's not how it should be, but that's how it was. And it was brilliant that we were able to have a conversation about that. So bringing all these things into the open is really important. And then last but not least, we really want to encourage the full membership to be representative of colleagues when they first think about joining the profession, as they stay in the profession, as they are promoted, whether they become fellows, which we're really encouraging, whether they're part of our chartered programs, whether these are teachers or leaders. So we're doing so much, but I'm going to quickly stop because it's already 1:03. So thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for convening, and Paul as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for your insightful contributions. Really fascinating from those personal stories and experiences to the institutional impact case studies, to the sector organizations and the work that they are doing in this agenda to galvanize change. And what I particularly struck by is from the sector organization is that they're not only doing sort of outward facing work, but they're doing inward facing work to say, well, actually, we are modeling the change that we want to see and modeling the change that we want to be. And I think this is important because this then gives your work much more authenticity and makes people want to believe what you're saying around this issue. So thank you all for just reconfirming that today and reassuring us that this is the approach that you are taking. I know we're out of time, but I want to make a 2-minute summary and then I hand back to Stephen about the key things I've picked up. We mentioned earlier, leadership is really critical. The intentionality, the accountability, having a clear communications plan. What I've realized, colleagues, is that a lot of good work is happening in schools, in other organizations, some of it of variable quality, but nonetheless, there's a lot of work happening. And there's a lot of mistrust as well. But part of that is because people don't know that the work is happening and people don't know the extent to which it's happening. So please, please, please think about having a communications plan, that sets out exactly what you're doing and tell people that they are welcome to come and join. And this is our action plan and this is our strategy. And these are the things we have achieved against our action plan this term, and next term we're moving to the next phase and you're welcome to join us and all of that kind of thing. People need to know. Even if they are a little bit suspicious, as long as you're keeping those communications channels open. The other thing about collaborating and connecting with others, which is what we are doing now, which is great, is to make sure that we don't go off and work in silos because we want systems thinking, but also we want case studies and to pool resources and energies and ideas, and working, as Emma said, also with the grassroots organizations which are in touch with the people who are doing this work and who've got a lot of experience and so on. And continue to challenge government and other structures to support this agenda, or to more effectively support this agenda. And the issue around case studies is important as well. Similarly, we know that there aren't many published case studies out there around anti-racism or EDI work more broadly. There aren't. And again, a lot of people are doing work, but if we can have those case studies, that would do really well for 2 reasons. One, it would help the field as a whole to benefit from those case studies, to see what works and under what conditions. But from an institutional standpoint, those case studies would form part of the institutional memory that in 2021, this organization under this leadership with these group of people went about and they did this, this, and this, and they achieved this, this, and this. And I think it's really important because a lot of work, as I said, is happening, but people are not thinking about collating it and setting out this impact logic. So people have to really produce this impact logic, that says we stood against inequity and up for racial justice at this point in time, and this forms part of the institutional memory in 20 years, in 30 years, regardless of where we are or whichever leaders come on board. And the final thing I wanted to say, which the colleagues at the beginning talked about, which is an important point to end on, is about listening without judgment and listening without interruption. It's so important that we create space to listen to people, because it is in those spaces. My colleague called them the dead white spaces. It is in those spaces, those pauses, that we can, to use Antonia's words, we can find direction at that kind of hinge point. So those are my kind of reflections, colleagues in Rush. Stephen, back to you.
So huge thank you to Professor Paul Miller for facilitating this fascinating discussion, and thank you to the practitioners that have been brave enough to come forward and to share their lived experiences. So I found it very moving, very insightful, and personal, very personal and much cherished experience. And thank you to the trusts, trust leaders, to sector bodies for sharing their important work, and for helping to support this ongoing conversation. But I think we need to remember this is just the start, and using the marathon analogy, we might be approaching the 5K marker, and we're going at a decent pace, and pace is important, so not to get too carried away too early. That's a marathon I know well from having competed in a marathon. You don't want to blow up at the end, so we need to keep that momentum going. I agree with Paul that sharing best practice is powerful, and I've been really interested to hear from trust leaders about the work they're doing. I think it's important that we shine a spotlight on that really good work. And I should say that unfortunately Kirsty Watts was unable to stay with us, and she wanted to provide some summary of work that's going on at the DFE and provide some reflections, but she had to depart. But what I think is encouraging is that the department are very keen to talk to this group, and we should take them at face value and take up the offer to enter into dialogue. What we don't want to do is end up in a talking shop where there is no impact, there's no end result. But of course, dialogue is important, and if there's an invitation for us to talk to colleagues at the department and ministers, then we should of course seize the opportunity. So finally, thank you very much for all that have participated. As I said, we will broadcast this discussion in the next couple of weeks. Alongside that, we will be publishing the statement of intent, which sector bodies in the room have all signed up to. And let's keep the momentum going. Let's make sure we come back together. I think it's important that we reflect on the progress that we've made after a short period of time, and let's keep going. Let's fight the good fight. Thank you so much.